So I'd like to introduce our faculty today. Some of you may know our faculty. Maybe you've taken a class with them before. First is Professor Marcus Stewart. Professor Marcus is the chair of the management department, as well as the associate dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Bentley. His current research focuses on diversity leadership, social justice, and career management. He teaches courses in leadership, organizational behavior, human resource management, organizational change, diversity, and teams. And he's a member of the Academy of Management. Professor Stewart has added numerous scholarly contributions and publications on the topics of leadership, diversity, management, and organizational behavior. Professor Marcus Stewart also teaches in our executive and professional education programs, like our mini MBA program and our Leadership Accelerator program, as well as the professional MBA program. So if you want to see more of Professor Stewart, check out those resources that we'll be sharing at the end of today's session. I'd also like to introduce you to Professor Emily Corwin. Professor Corwin teaches courses in organizational behavior and human resource management at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and including in Bentley's executive PhD program and the professional MBA program. Professor Corwin is a member of the editorial board at the Journal of Management. Her research focuses on interpersonal interactions, performance feedback, negotiations, cross-status interactions, and abusive supervision, diversity, equity, and inclusion, social, class, gender, and intersectionality, and workplace emotions with secondary interests in methodological issues. Her research has been published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, the Journal of Management, Harvard Business Review, Journal of Managerial Psychology, and the International Journal of Conflict Management, among many others. So as well, Professor Emily Corwin is teaching in our professional MBA program. So if you have more interest in that, please check out the resources that we'll share after today's session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our faculty. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to take down my slides here so that you can go ahead and share.
Thank you, Laura.
Yes, thank you, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So hopefully you all are now seeing my PowerPoint. I do see a question in the chat about the speaker's industry experience. So I think that is something that we can come back to at the end in more detail. But I've previously worked in human resources and fulfilled many of the other HR roles. Marcus, do you want to touch on that for yourself briefly?
Sure. I mean, I've been a faculty member for 26 years now, but did work on Wall Street as a stockbroker for a couple years, and have done a lot of board work, chaired boards of nonprofits and so forth. So I've gained a lot of experience in what we're talking about here today around giving and receiving feedback as a lifelong learner in lots of different professional and academic contexts. So thank you. I hope that's helpful anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And again, we're happy to touch on that there at the end. So to get started, quick question for you all. Can you just drop in the chat one word that describes how you feel about giving performance feedback, whether you're giving it to your subordinates, whether you're giving it to peers, any instance where you've had to give it to somebody at work before, one word that describes how you feel about that experience. Okay, we've got some positive here, valuable, empowered. Others are saying things like hesitant or anxious, nervous, sometimes uncomfortable. Got a couple of folks for that. Apprehensive. Absolutely. This is what the research tells us and what our own feelings tell us too about giving performance feedback, right? So at least 44% of managers find this to be a stressful experience. Of course, it is very valuable valuable, especially whenever done well. But there are a lot of barriers to giving feedback that lead to this apprehension or this anxiety, right? So, whenever we're talking about different barriers to giving feedback, we're really talking about a mix of different structural or psychological obstacles. So, coming from the structural perspective, leaders often feel like they don't have enough time, or maybe they don't have the opportunity to observe people's behavior that they have to give feedback to. But it's their job to give the feedback, whether or not they've been able to see that behavior, right? So, without having concrete examples, it can feel really anxiety inducing. And some managers may feel like they don't know how to give feedback or how to do it well. And then, of course, there's also the psychological component where people worry, is this going to harm the relationship I have with this person? How is this person going to react whenever I give them this feedback, especially if it's meant to be critical or constructive, right? And so all of these barriers can lead to people engaging in feedback avoidance, even whenever it's something that is very valuable that needs to happen. And whenever the feedback is given, sometimes it's sort of rushed through or it's kept very vague in an effort to sort of maintain that relationship and get around the fear and anxiety surrounding those barriers. However, whenever we avoid feedback, this can create bigger issues because employees can't improve if they don't know what is expected or where they're falling short. So, out of those barriers that I just discussed, could you all just mention in the chat if any of those feel particularly relevant to your work context, or if something else I didn't mention as a barrier might feel relevant to giving feedback at work for you? Yes, I can go back and show them. So some of the barriers I listed would be insufficient time, lack of direct observation, lack of training, lack of clear goals, fear of how the recipient may respond or how the relationship might be damaged. I know from my prior experience in HR, it was really viewed as a situation of I just have to give this because HR makes me give it, right? So maybe not fully understanding the reason why feedback needs to be provided and maybe viewing it as sort of like a box check that has to happen. Yeah, so a few people are saying fear of the recipient's response or reactions. That seems to be a really big one there, right? How is this person going to respond? And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything dramatic, right? We probably know that most of our coworkers, we hope we know that most of our coworkers aren't necessarily going to blow up in our face if we say, hey, you need to do this thing better. But most of us also don't want to hurt people's feelings whenever we have to work, just generally, or whenever we have to work with them on a regular basis, right? And so for this reason, people feel like feedback is really stressful experience. It takes a lot of energy because you're trying to balance, okay, how do I get this message across, even whenever it's positive, with the actual like constructive pieces of this feedback, right?
I was just going to chime in there, Emily, because a few folks did put when about the how they felt giving feedback that is they felt productive and felt valuable. Does anyone what could maybe some folks share in the chat? What are the factors or what's going on in the context that helps feedback to feel like a productive process, or what helps it feel like it's a positive, valuable exercise? If you want. Ah, okay. Excellent. So when the feedback's actionable, so tone of our voices, I'm guessing that perhaps if someone wants to elaborate on that, but that there suggests some positivity or mutual respect, focus on the task at hand. Let's see, all about the tone, it being conversation versus lecture. There you go. Excellent. Balanced, a clear action plan. First, highlight the strengths and positive sides, then mention what to improve. All right, that's also sometimes called the sandwich approach, right? Some good news, then the bad news, and then finish it up again with something positive. Okay, thank you for that. To get a well-rounded view of our feedback experiences. But by and large, certainly what Emily's putting forth, for the most part, people have a difficult time delivering what we're calling negative feedback, feedback that is supposed to be corrective or developmental, and suggest someone needs to improve or change what they're doing. Now I'll turn it back over. Thanks for that. Sorry for that side street there, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. One criticism I get from many of my co-authors and co-teachers is that I often take the more negative perspective, or critical perspective, especially someone who studies negative performance feedback. But hopefully, we'll bring this back around and leave feeling a lot more positive here at the end. So research on giving performance feedback is actually fairly new. We've spent a lot of time thinking about receiving performance feedback and how people don't necessarily like hearing these negative messages. However, we now know within the past few years that for people who are giving the feedback for all of the reasons that you all mentioned, as well as the desire to do a really good job because we know it's so valuable, that people can view this as really energy depleting. It takes up a lot of their resources. And for leaders who are higher in empathy, they tend to be better at giving these sorts of messages where they know how people are going to respond, or they can sort of guess how people are going to respond, like some of you all mentioned. High empathy leaders tend to have good relationships with their recipients, like Edward mentioned. They are better at knowing when feedback is going to be well received and having that right tone that you all are talking about. However, my co-authors and we wanted to know how giving this negative feedback impacted those high empathy leaders. So yeah, they're good at giving the message compared to someone who maybe is lower in empathy and can't put themselves in the shoes of that feedback recipient. But how did they feel afterwards? And what we found is that because empathetic leaders are more likely to focus on that experience of the other person, that they themselves can be a little bit drained from that afterwards. They tend to be a little bit less attentive. They might be a little bit more stressed. And so they're less effective in their own jobs as well. But giving feedback, whether positive or negative, is part of the job, right? And so at the end of this, whenever we talk about some ways that we can do this well, I'll provide some tips for people who maybe are high in empathy and maybe having that anxiety or sort of fear around response, despite wanting to provide feedback in a valuable way.
Now I'll jump in with an example in fact, Emily, from a workshop we did this last weekend on feedback. We talked about this idea of having empathy. And so for myself as department chair and with 35 full-time faculty, about 50 professors all together with our terrific adjunct faculty, when there's something significant to convey, someone's facing some performance challenges in the classroom or with their scholarship or what have you, like I've lost sleep. Like you can get stressed about, look, this is impactful for this person's career. I anticipate a challenging conversation, or I don't want them to get the wrong message and so forth. And so again, as a person with empathy, that's stressful, right? So losing sleep, not being able to focus well on other things for the days leading up or perhaps the days after, right? That's what Emily's work published in the Harvard Business Review and Journal of Applied Psychology, some of the top outlets in the field, found that very dynamic, that having empathy is great. It helps you to do some things really well, like delivering developmental feedback, but it also has its costs. On the other hand, I don't know, one of my favorite TV shows is Big Bang Theory, right? You can be Sheldon Cooper and basically have no empathy, like just deliver bad news and all the time, or just make your observations on a regular basis. But on the other hand, how well is that received? And that's also just not the reality for most of us. Most of us are much more in tune with our feelings and how others feel. So thanks for letting me get that example in.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that, Marcus. So today we're talking about giving and receiving feedback. So that's a little bit on the giving side. I'm actually going to turn it over to Marcus for a couple of slides to chat more about the other side of things.
Excellent. So folks, once again, we'll return to the chat. And there are two sides to this feedback game. So giving feedback and then receiving it. And we're talking about developmental feedback or performance related feedback, especially that which is challenging, right? Again, letting someone know they need to improve or change something. So, what do we find more challenging, kind of giving that feedback or receiving it? Let's see what kind of experiences we have between us. Giving, giving, giving. All right. Indifferent. Aha, there we go. Some receiving. All right. I think I'm more on the receiving side also. I'm learning how to give it, even though I am empathetic and it's hard, but I can see it in that, having being productive and having the value. And so that helps. When I receive it, oh, something I'm doing wrong. I've got to change. I've got to improve. Yeah, that's a little bit different game. Um, all right. Thank you very much, Charlie. So if we'll advance the slide there. Thank you. So on the receiving side, we'll talk a little bit about the receiving side. I think most of us probably do pretty well with receiving positive feedback or feedback that affirms our efforts and our effectiveness. But the work shows there's just as much and sometimes more value in getting that feedback that helps us to correct, right? To change tack and improve our contributions. So what happens when we receive feedback letting us know that we are not meeting performance expectations or that there's something that we need to change? So first, it tends to be emotional. There is an emotional reaction. Again, it could be a positive reaction when we get the good news, but often there's that tension, right? That tension when we receive negative feedback. We might even be expecting it, right? But to hear the words like, oh, it can have kind of a visceral effect or hit us at a gut level that sometimes we may not have been ready for, may not have been anticipating. Again, even if we had a hint that it might not be a great conversation. And that also, we know this is true about receiving feedback, and that informs so many of our comments, a few moments ago when we asked about why it's hard to deliver that feedback. And so many times, emotional, emotional, emotional. Someone might take it the wrong way. What's going to happen with the relationship, etc. All right. So when we're on the receiving end, we know there can be an emotional response. Um, Defensive reasoning, right? Moving to that second box. Often, not only are we emotional, but we tend to get defensive. We want to defend ourselves. We'll cut the person off. Well, wait a minute. I thought, right, or I was told, or in fact, if you look at the numbers, right. So sometimes if we know there has been a shortcoming or a deficit in our performance, or something in the presentation, the group meeting didn't go well, so we expect to hear about it. But in the meantime, we've been building our defenses. I've now spent the last 24 hours, or you asked me to meet with you on Friday. So now you gave me 3 days to build up my defenses, to think of all the reasons why I did only the best I possibly could, with the resources at hand and under the demands that were, that we faced at the time. And all the reasons why it's not my fault, right? That someone else didn't do their part. You weren't on time with your thing. The alarm clock, the cat, the client changed the date, changed the deliverables. The client changed the specs. They're not communicative. We asked for this information on Monday. We didn't get it until Thursday. All right. So we're defensive, right? We make excuses. And so again, as a feedback, as a feedback receiver, we know that we can tend to do this, and as feedback givers, we've seen it, and many of us have experienced it many times, and it makes the process very hard. So now we have to cut through defensiveness, or kind of with our badminton racket or what have you, the tennis racket, just keep batting it back. Like, yes, I know, I understand your alarm clock. I know the client was I know they were slow, right? You have to keep fighting through all those things to finally try to drill down to what was your responsibility in the situation, right? What did you do as the employee or as the project lead or as the salesperson, the liaison, etc. Right? So that can make the process very difficult. And it's the also short circuits the learning, right? So now your manager or supervisor, team lead has made the effort to get you the feedback, but now the value of it can be undermined by defensiveness. If people don't really internalize the message, then we're just likely to move on and repeat the same behaviors again in the future. We can go to the third, and again, if folks have questions or ideas or examples you want to put in the chat, please do along the way. The third box here talks about how negative feedback can worsen the environmental conditions or reduce psychological safety. Frankly, sometimes our feelings can be hurt. All right, so there's the emotional part, right back to box one. But if my feelings are hurt and now I feel maybe betrayed, or if maybe the trust or how I viewed you has been altered a little bit as the feedback giver, my team lead, my supervisor, etc., well, that can reduce my sense of psychological safety. Now I feel maybe I'm more likely to be judged. I'm on pins and needles. I'm on eggshells. Maybe that's not pins and needles. I'm walking on eggshells now. Careful. I don't want to do the wrong things or be seen the wrong way or make a mistake. Since I received this negative feedback already, that disrupted me or kind of caught me off guard, maybe. So that our sense of collegiality and being at ease at work and being able to be ourselves, that can also be compromised a bit when we receive criticism. Again, especially if we're defensive and we refuse to, if we fail to internalize that feedback and see that it's really about our development or really about improving our performance or really about supporting the client. It's not a personal attack. And so again, to the last box, what does that lead to, right? Again, maybe some withdrawal, again, being on eggshells, which means we can't be our full selves and deliver everything that we can bring to the table. Just checking the chat there. I saw there's a comment. So ineffectively deliver critical feedback makes me second guess myself and my proficiency in my role. Creates a period of being or feeling inauthentic. There you go. Thank you very much, Casey. Right on the mark in terms of how it can alter the environment, the team climate, and how we interact with others.
Marcus, I want to interrupt you. Also, if this might be a great time to also answer a question we have in the Q&A.
Great.
And that's from Edward. How does one defend against biased feedback without coming off as giving excuses?
All right. Thank you. So I'll take a crack at that. Emily, if you have a thought as well, please do chime in. So just to repeat and make sure I'm clear, Sarah. So the question is, how do we defend against biased feedback? Can you read it again?
Yeah. How do we defend against biased feedback without coming off as giving excuses?
All right. So I think, and now this is Edward, thank you very much for the question. Now, without having any insight into the context, which is hugely important, right? Situational variables are the main driver of our behaviors and many of our outcomes at work. So absent any context or understanding of the situation, as the feedback receiver, if I assume that this is a direct report relationship, so this is my supervisor, my manager giving me this feedback. I think one way to perhaps effectively receive the feedback and also deal with box number 2 here, right? Being defensive. I think if we can maybe try to suspend judgment, right? Suspend judgment of the feedback giver and that person's credibility, their predisposition, or maybe their biases. If we can try to put that aside and take the feedback first at face value. All right. So what is the message? What's the message that they're giving me? And then if you, again, going back to our skills workshop from this weekend, Emily, some shared inquiry or some active listening, right? If I think the feedback is biased, well, let's gather more information. Now, I'm not going to call the person out as biased, or I'm not going to say this feedback is biased, or it's not fair, or it's one-sided, or it's only capturing a portion. I'll ask. So thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate it, and appreciate your support. So you mentioned that, I didn't do my part here, or I came up a little short there. Can you share a little more about what the expectations were? Or can you share a little bit more about how I didn't show up in that moment or didn't perform up to expectations? And so if you ask for clarification and ask for some examples, ask for the reference point, right? So this is compared to the KPIs that we set in my performance review, or is this related to the project specifically, or just in that particular, that idiosyncratic interaction? So I think, Edward, so two things I'm suggesting here. First, let's do our very best to try to suspend our own judgment because we have our own biases. So let's hold that first and then use some shared inquiry or active listening to try to gather as much information and get as much clarity about the feedback as possible. So when we have that, now let's get separation, right? Let that meeting end and we can revisit it, right? I can process that. I can talk about that feedback with a trusted peer or a mentor or what have you, or Gemini, right? Now I can meet with my supervisor again, right? Let's meet again on Monday just to review and make sure I'm clear and we'll do our best to try to stay on the facts and present our case, but we want to understand as much as possible and gather information as opposed to, I know this is biased, so now my guards are already up. I'm already defensive, and that means I'm less likely, or I'm making it very unlikely that I'll be able to get the essence of the message. There's some validity in there. My first search should be, let's get that validity, all right? And then whatever the bias is, that can come later. So that's my initial thought, again, without any context. I don't know, Emily, if anything comes to mind for you. Don't feel like you have to jump in, but if
Yeah, I'll just jump in briefly for the sake of time. But I do think that oftentimes whenever we're talking about giving and receiving feedback, that there can be sort of this assumption that everyone is fortunate enough to have a good boss, right? Or a good person who's giving feedback. And Marcus is my boss. He's a great boss, just throwing that out there. But not everyone is that fortunate to have this situation, right? They are sometimes being singled out. The feedback is sometimes not being given by a credible source. Sometimes the feedback is actually unfair. And so we know there are certain things about the feedback source. So the feedback source being whoever's providing it, whether it's a supervisor or a peer or someone else in the organization, and about the feedback environment itself. So that really influence the extent to which people accept the feedback message, right? So taking the feedback source. If source credibility is high, if I think, yeah, you're an expert, you know how to do my job, I trust the feedback that you're giving me, and then I'm going to be more likely to accept that feedback and not see it as biased. If I feel like that the feedback is fair, I'm going to be more likely to accept it. And so there are some sort of tricks and tips for giving feedback and doing it well that are going to reduce this defensiveness and sort of ensure your feedback recipient that you do have their best interest at heart. But yes, fully agree. Love all of the advice that Marcus gave. I love what Charlie chimed in the chat here about, again, taking a step back and then sort of, you let your emotions calm, because as we've been talking about, this is a two-way conversation, feedback, and it's an emotionally charged situation. And so if regardless of whether you're right and the source doesn't have credibility and they are unfair, if you go in like ready to burn the place down because you're angry, then you won't get anywhere. But yeah, definitely great questions. Appreciate those from everybody.
Thank you, Emily. And then just one more, and I appreciate Charlie's comment about use empirical evidence to defend your actions or position. Okay, just a note of caution. Okay, again, to our second box here on the slide, people often respond defensively. We do an exercise in our feedback skills workshop here on campus it's called the defensive reasoning exercise. I also do this in my MBA classes. I teach a leadership class here, Leading Responsibly, GR 603, and we have a module on learning and development and a feedback exercise we do, including role plays and some reflective exercise. One of them we call a defensive reasoning reflection. One of the things, Charlie and other folks on the call, that we discover with the defensive reasoning reflection is that there are always contextual and situational factors that you can call on or point out that are in your favor. All right. So yes, your alarm clock didn't go off. Yes, there was traffic. Yes, the client did change the specs at the last minute. Yes, the client was slow in getting feedback to you. Yes, you communicated to your teammate on Slack and they didn't get back to you in time with the proper file, or they sent it with the wrong format, etc. So all those things can be true. And we talk about the idea of defensiveness. So each one of those truths I like to conceptualize as a brick. Client was change the spec, brick in the wall right there at the foundation. My teammate didn't respond on Slack, brick, another brick, and I keep building them up. So now I've got this wall of defensiveness to protect me, but it also prevents me from learning. It's keeping me from engaging in the introspection that's necessary to learn and figure out how I could have gone about things differently. Right? Yes, the client changed the specs at the last time, but I could have double checked. I could have sent my slides and I could have sent the presentation and I could have walked through it for a pre-session walkthrough the day before. I could have asked for that and I didn't. I could have not only gone through Slack, but also this other channel and the text and so forth to make sure I had the information if I really needed it. Right? So there are the client changed the specs. Yes, but it wasn't, we were encouraged to in our training and our protocol says to prepare for different scenarios. And I didn't because we usually never ever have to. So just be careful about being so focused on finding things to defend ourselves that we let that overrun the learning. All right, let it go in again, suspend judgment, and let's go in with the assumption that there is some validity to this feedback, and it's my job to find it. Even when, in the extreme example, let's say like even when the feedback giver is awful, you've had that terrible boss or that terrible teammate that at some point just blurts something out, like in the middle of the team meeting. Well, stop offending me, Emily, or stop, blah, blah, blah. You always, and it's like, whoa, like, sometimes those are critical incidents. Like everyone pauses. This finally bubbled to the surface and he called out Emily right in front of everyone. That is not the right time to do it, not the right place to do it, not the right tone, but is there validity in the message? Right? Emily got feedback there, or some of it with children, right? The kid finally just screams, "You're not fair. You always do that and I don't." So they're screaming in the grocery store, but often there's truth in what they're saying, right? Again, the message wasn't delivered effectively or in the proper context, but as the feedback receiver, right? Let's be learners. If you're an effective learner, you're going to forgive. You won't expect perfection from the feedback deliverer. I understand you're under duress. I understand this is a difficult thing. My job is to get the value from the message. So that would be really like next level learning behavior on our part as the receiver. So anyway, thank you so much, folks. Those are great comments, and really these are super challenging situations. So thanks for hearing us out. And thank you, Casey. Yes, the active listening, shared inquiry. Right, I'll put that in the chat. That is something that you can shared inquiry and make sure that goes up. So if you do, just a search on that, you can grab a couple of exercises, LinkedIn classes, LinkedIn learning and so forth that will, can really be very helpful in that regard. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think we need to move on for the sake of time here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just taking a look at the comments here again. I love Casey's point. We're reiterating this is a two-way conversation that's happening, right? And Charlie's point too: praise in public, coach in private. People take
Yes.
feedback very differently depending on the context, right? So especially whenever you're studying feedback, that's something we often control for is, okay, well, was this feedback overheard by others? Was it public or was it private? Because that very much changes, again, the way that people accept the feedback, how defensive that they get. So all of that to say, again, I love to approach things from a negative angle and wrap it up with the positive, with a nice little positive bow here. So generally, we know people don't really like to give feedback. People like to say they want to receive it, but they usually mean like that positive feedback or a little bit of constructive, but sometimes those negative messages can be really hard to hear. People don't love to receive it either. It makes them feel less capable, makes them question their own self-worth, all of these negative things that Mark has talked about and you all gave examples of in the chat. So why are we doing it anyway? Obviously, the goal is not just to hurt people's feelings, or to make people feel bad. That's not what we're trying to do here. Feedback serves really three different purposes, and they can kind of intermingle together. So the first purpose obviously is administrative, or maybe not so obvious, is that administrative sort of maybe once or twice a year type of feedback. It's not given as frequently, and it's really tied to your pay raises or your promotions, or even whether or not you get to continue being employed, which we all generally like to be. And so this type of feedback is meant to give us a really like fair and systematic way of making decisions based on people's merit, right? The feedback that I think a lot of our conversation today has centered around is really developmental feedback. So the purpose of developmental feedback is exactly what it sounds like, right? We're trying to develop this person. We're trying to get this person to grow and improve. And so we often think of developmental feedback as, okay, you have something to improve, but it could also be strengths-based. It could be, hey, this is actually what you're really good at, so let's focus on these things and try to expand your skill set in this way, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but it is goal focused and future oriented. And then the last purpose would be strategic. And so this is also goal focused, but it's more about the goals of the organization. So if, for example, a feedback provider is telling somebody that they need to be more collaborative or engage more in teamwork, then they're really communicating this is what matters in the organization, right? We value teamwork. We value collaboration. Versus if someone is giving feedback about, hey, you're really innovative, we love that, or you're not and you need to be, then they're signaling, hey, innovation is really valued here. And so ideally, our developmental feedback and our strategic feedback would be aligned to some extent, right? Because employee effectiveness should be reflected in the overall organizational effectiveness. But what purpose the feedback is sort of for matters for how the feedback is given and how the feedback is received, right?
I also
So
point out, Emily, I'll
I'm
just
sorry,
point out
Marcus,
quick
go ahead.
that, yeah, I'll just point out quickly too that again, this also accounts for positive feedback just as well, right? You want a positive document who's doing things well, who deserves a little more, or who's now in line for, what type of training activities and developmental experiences. And then also in terms of strategic or guiding and improving strengths-based coaching, right? But really focusing on what people do well, helping to put them in positions to do more of that. Or maybe some of it could be serendipitous, like learning or creative. Like, wow, wait, how did you get there? What do we do? So yes, let's keep doing that. Right, here's a new process or a new way, but keep doing that. Right, we didn't train you on that. We didn't coach you up for it, but it works. So now we want to keep you doing that. So now there's, we might even start adjusting our systems, what our expectations are, our processes, and how we go about things. But positive, this is all about feedback in general, positive as well as negative feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And so whenever we're trying to develop someone or give sort of feedback with the goal of improvement, given alongside an administrative purpose, this can sort of alter the intended message of the feedback itself. So, for example, if the purpose of the feedback is to give somebody a raise, then the person in charge of giving that feedback might sort of inflate it or leave out those critical points for improvement because they don't want to harm somebody's paycheck, so to speak. Or they feel like, yeah, there are these spots where you could really do better, but overall you deserve this promotion. So I'm going to just not even touch on this, right? Or alternatively, if that message is given, but you've just given me a raise that I was expecting, I don't care about what you said because I got the outcome that I wanted and that I was looking for, right? And so whenever feedback is being given, it's important to keep sort of this purpose in mind and to think, okay, should this feedback message be focused just on this administrative purpose? You got the raise, you got the promotion, and then should we maybe be having these more developmental conversations more frequently, right? And maybe separately from these sort of compensation and rewards types of conversations. So all something to think about when thinking about how to give your message there or how to receive it as well.
Yeah, the textbooks, all the HR textbooks and development and training textbooks often make the case that you should separate administrative feedback and conversations from developmental conversations. So a developmental conversation, I'm telling you what you're doing well, but also things you need to work on and things you need to improve. As Emily mentioned, if in that same conversation I mention whether you got the promotion or not, or whether you got and your pay raise or lack of pay raise, the value right in the developmental feedback is often lost because we're so focused on if I got my raise, well, I'm just focused on that, everything's great. I might be missing the developmental things you're sharing with me. If I didn't get my raise, I'm focused, I'm getting defensive, I'm emotional, etc., and so I could miss even all the positive stuff you're telling me about the things I did well, never mind the things I need to do to improve. So Emily mentioned again the ongoing, right? Developmental feedback should be ongoing every day, every week, right? It's something that is happening on a regular basis. All right, folks. So we are, in fact, our design called for us to kind of be wrapping up right about now, but we do have a role play. So we're going to try this out. And I will play the role of a supervisor. Emily, if you want to give a little bit of the context, I think we have a slide with some context on it for folks. So I will play the uh, part of the supervisor. So 20-year veteran of the organization. So obviously some of this is autobiographical. And I'm providing feedback to an employee who's been with the organization for 4 years, but is a hypo, right? A high performing person. That employee is a strong contributor, but needs to improve teamwork and collaboration skills. So I'm the supervisor. Emily is the hypo. All right. Oh, I guess we just go now. Okay. All right. Let me get into character here. All right. Hi, Emily. Uh, Thanks for joining me today to talk a little bit about how things are going. I wanted to share just some feedback about how you've been performing with the team. And specifically, it seems as though you seem to be really proactive, which is great, but you seem to be taking like the higher profile, more challenging tasks and doing them yourself. You're working long hours, you're working really hard through the weekend and so forth, but you're taking on these tasks yourself when ideally they would be done with the team and the team would engage in those tasks instead of you personally.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback, but it really just works a lot better if I do it myself. I find that whenever I try to get collaboration with the team, it ends up taking almost twice as long to get things done, and we miss deadlines. And so it's often just a lot more efficient for me to just take care of it than have all of this back and forth with them.
Thanks for that, Emily. I appreciate that for sure. For someone who's talented and ambitious like you and willing to put in those hours, I understand that it feels more efficient and you're getting things done. At the same time, our strategy as an organization is to be team-based and for your teammates, for your collaborators to develop so that they can operate at their maximum potential, they need experience. They need experience with these challenging tasks. And it could be that you also will benefit from that collaborative activity, right? That give and take and that learning with the team.
But I've been doing this the whole time I've worked for the organization, and this is the first time this is coming up. I mean, even just 2 weeks ago, I'm working on a project by myself over the weekend. 6 months ago, I'm working on a project by myself over the weekend. Why is this a problem now?
And scene. All right. All right. Thank you, Emily. So our acting debut here today. So so that's a scenario. How about some thoughts in the chat about things that were done well, or maybe some things we observed that were problematic, or observations at all?
I was just answering Casey quickly in the chat there, so that you can,
Sure.
I mean, not ignore it, but not
Sure.
relevant to the
No, no
question.
worries.
But yeah, any
No worries.
thoughts about how that feedback scenario went? Happy to hear from you all,
Yeah.
or would love to hear from you all.
And but in the meantime, Emily, I guess let's point out some things that we kind of
Sure.
had designed in just for the sake, we're running up against time a
Yeah,
little
we
bit.
are, yeah.
So one thing that we wanted to get at was the fact that the feedback, oh, thank you very much. One thing we wanted to get at was that the timeliness, right? That here comes this feedback, which is valuable. It's valid feedback, and important. But if Emily's been behaving, if your employee's been behaving this way for the last year, and she's pointing out specific examples of 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, I did this, and no one said anything, right? That's a problem. And so again, one of the major challenges, so we just mentioned a few moments ago, ongoing real-time feedback, right? On a regular basis, that is the best case scenario. That is optimal. When we have to deliver negative feedback sometimes, or developmental feedback, we're afraid of the emotional part. So we procrastinate, we wait, we hope it fixes itself. We hope they got the message. We hope something happened. But now a month has gone by. Now 2 months have gone by, and it's problematic. You're almost guaranteeing, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that it will be more emotional because now they've engaged in that behavior so much longer and may feel betrayed or unsupported that it's just coming to light. So that's one of the points that we wanted to kind of convey in the role play, and I'll try to catch up with the chat here. All right, did a good job pointing out growing opportunities. Okay, Casey, you're right. The employee is not wrong. Again, so back to our point with Edward, you can be your defensiveness doesn't mean you're wrong, right? We base our defensiveness on things that are factual, but are they everything, right? Something could be a fact and still not. So Emily's wrong. She could be more efficient her way, but we're thinking about the long-term trajectory of the organization and the development of a team of employees, not just what's best for her or for that one particular employee. So she's not wrong, but she's also not right.
Oh.
Your exact great comment, Casey, about not bringing up sooner. Sorry, did I cut you off there?
Oh no, I was just sorry, I'm reading as well. So if you've already touched on this, I think that Amy's and Patricia's points are both kind of interesting. So Amy is saying referencing that the team was talking about it also feels uncomfortable, because that's a really great point. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, I'm already getting this negative feedback and now everyone hates me. Cool, right? So thinking through like how can we try to put ourselves in that person's shoes? They need critical incidents to say, hey, this is actually a problem, right? But how do we do this in a way that is truly a critical incident without feeling like someone is being like sort of piled onto, right? Like on this day you did X, right?
Yeah.
And then also Patricia's point, what does support look like? That doesn't take away from the fact that yes, you are not performing up to this standard. We value teamwork and collaboration. You're not doing it, right? But maybe that person needs training, right? It's not, you have to have a plan moving forward. Maybe it's training. Maybe it is a meeting with everyone about how things need to go. So yeah, I love both of those
Great.
points.
Great comment. Thank you, Emily. Great comment from Debbie about the sandwich. As soon as you say, this is great, but, or however, right, it just breaks it. So the value of the positive feedback can be lost if there is an intent to deliver some positive feedback. There was a comment above. I don't remember, at least I didn't intentionally say that. I want to intimate that your teammates have been talking, or that I heard. That is a worst practice as a feedback deliverer, to try to attribute the feedback to someone else, especially like kind of an abstract, your teammates have been talking, or I heard. That's not it. If you have something specific and factual to cite from, Sarah told me that you did this. Okay, that's one thing. But to generalize and kind of try to deflect or be abstract about the source of the feedback, that's a no-no. That undermines your credibility. And you talk about destroying the environment and psychological safety. I mean, that's really underhanded. So I would stay away from that. Take responsibility and onus for the feedback yourself. Or if you have direct observations, cite those observations.
Yeah. I also love this recent comment here about how the question is always for the manager on how to handle this situation, and managers need to get proper training. So I don't disagree with that statement. I think it's great that we can have as feedback recipients, which all of us are at some point or another, that we can sort of learn how to emotionally regulate and temper our responses so that we don't suffer, right? Because we don't want to leave that situation feeling negatively about how it's gone. We actually have some evidence, not published yet, but that in the short term, negative feedback doesn't necessarily improve people's performance because they're so worried about the message itself and how do I move forward. And so if it's not actually improving, then it's not meeting, it's not serving its intended purpose, right? So as a recipient, there are things that can be done, but really, I agree to a large extent, it does fall on the shoulders of the feedback provider, because how do we make sure someone knows what they're doing? We can make sure that the feedback is actionable, the person leaves with next steps, right? And that the feedback doesn't come as a surprise. So what we found in our research is that when the feedback is novel and it's surprising, that has a worse effect. We also found that whenever it has to be attended to immediately, like you right now have to deal with this situation, that can have a worse effect as well. So a lot of these things, the feedback provider does have control over, right? How do I make sure I'm giving more frequent formal feedback so this doesn't come off as so surprising? How do I provide very specific, timely feedback? So I think, yes, I think we are. Yes, Jacob is right. Smart actions. Feedback is at the end of the day really tied to goal setting, particularly when we're talking about that developmental and strategic purpose. And so smart goals, smart feedback, right? Specific, measurable, something that can be followed up on. And so making sure, again, that it's on things that employees can control, and that it is relevant to the person's work. So I know we don't really have time for this story, but I'll never forget the feedback that I got from the HR manager whenever I worked in HR during my performance appraisal. She told me that I didn't need to worry about it because I would grow out of my personality, which is the worst feedback that anyone could possibly give because it violates, I felt pretty embarrassed or put down by that, right? It felt really irrelevant to my work. And it's kind of too late to do any good because your feedback is pretty solid by the time your personality is pretty solid by the time you're like 7. So at 23, I was sort of just, probably who I was, right? And it's not something that's within a person's control. So how do we then make this actionable? What is it about that behavior that can actually be changed, right? And so just wrapping up here with sort of our 4 keys. There are so many keys. There are so many keys and tips, but Marcus and I chatted and we thought, what do we have here? Be timely and frequent, focus on behavior and results. Remember that it is a 2-way conversation, and make sure to set the goals and follow up. So thank you all so much. I'll wrap up because I know we took so much time, but thank you all so
Thanks,
much for
everyone.
your participation in the chat. Really great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. It was great to have you. Like I mentioned at the start, we will be sharing the slides as well as some resources with you after today's session via email. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, please reach out to Marcus and Emily. You can find both their emails on our website if you have more questions. And we'll be sure to share that with you. We do have monthly power hours. So thank you, Charlie. Our next session is going to be next month, and I will make sure that we include that in the follow-up communication because I can't remember the date off the top of my head. Sarah, if you have the date, I can't remember, but I know we have an exciting power hour coming up next month as well, showcasing another one of our skills workshops from the professional MBA program. Please reach out if you have any questions about these degree programs, certificate programs that we run on topics like today's.
And I just want to add, and thank you all, and thank you, Marcus and Emily. There's one question hanging out in the chat, and maybe we can reply to that if you wanted to stay on for that, Charlie, or otherwise we can send you an email and respond in the Q&A about generational.
Cross-generational. And then there was another comment also about upward feedback, but I have a 1 o'clock. I'm sorry, I can't hang, but that
So,
would be a great next, part 2.
Yeah, I agree with the upward. I'm happy to stick around for the lingering questions. Marcus, I'll see you at 2 department meetings. So, but yeah, happy to stick around for
Thank
anyone
you.
who's still here. I don't think I had the Q&A. I just had the webinar chat. So anything I missed, I can spend a few minutes on here.
oh, thank you, Emily. So the question was, what strategies can help to make feedback more impactful across generations?
Yeah, so I really actually emphasize so I teach right now, I'm teaching human resource management to undergrads, juniors and seniors mostly. And one thing that I try to emphasize to them is that generational differences don't seem to be as drastic as what we often hear about in the popular press, at least whenever it comes to these very standard behaviors like giving feedback, right? Because people still need feedback that's specific. They still need feedback that is not surprising. And so and this could just be, I mean, I think it's a little bit backed up by research, but generations are not my specialty necessarily. But I think overall, while there are some cohort differences between generations, we all kind of want to be treated the same, regardless if we're Gen Z or a millennial or Gen X. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm sorry if it's not. Maybe I shouldn't have stuck around to answer.
I think that is very helpful. And I appreciate you staying in for the extra innings. And thanks for your response, Charlie. And
Yeah, thank you so much for your participation. All right, creative problem solving for impact. Maybe I will come to that one. Thank you all so much. Appreciate this.
thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.